Every morning for the last 3 months, I woke up with the taste of copper in my mouth and a nausea so deep it felt like my bones were vibrating. The best doctors in Chicago told me it was just old age. They said my hair falling out was stress, and the bruises on my arms were because my skin was thinning. They were wrong. The answer wasn't in a medical file. It was ticking on my left wrist. It took an old Italian watchmaker in a dusty shop to save my life. He didn't use a stethoscope. He used a Geiger counter. When he looked at the expensive watch my son gave me for my 70th birthday, his face went pale. He didn't just ask me to take it off. He screamed at me to throw it across the room. I did not understand anything until the machine started screaming too. That was the moment I realized my birthday present wasn't a gift. It was an execution device. Before I tell you how I survived the most cold-blooded betrayal a father could ever imagine, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people hear this story. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from today? I always love reading your replies. My name is Jeremiah Brooks. I am 70 years old. I spent 40 years as a mechanical engineer, building bridges that thousands of people drive over every day without fear. I know how things work. I know how to fix things that are broken. But nothing in my engineering manuals prepared me for the moment I walked into Russo's timepieces on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I felt terrible that day. My legs felt like they were filled with wet sand. Every step was a negotiation with gravity. I was only there because the watch had stopped ticking. It was a heavy, gold chronograph that my son Desmond had given me 3 months ago. He told me it cost him $5,000. He told me it was a symbol of how much he appreciated everything I had done for him. I had never taken it off. Not when I showered, not when I slept. I wanted everyone to see that my son loved me. The shop was small and smelled of oil and old wood. Mr. Russo was behind the counter. He was 75, 5 years older than me, with thick glasses that made his eyes look huge. He was known for being grumpy, but he was the best in the city. I leaned against the counter, trying to catch my breath. I unclasped the watch and slid it across the glass surface. My hand was shaking. It had been shaking a lot lately. "Mr. Russo, the watch has stopped," I said, my voice sounding raspier than usual. "I think it just needs a battery or a cleaning. It is very special to me. My son gave it to me." Russo grunted. He didn't look up at me. He just picked up the watch and screwed his jeweler's loop into his eye. He turned the watch over in his hands. "Heavy," he muttered. "Too heavy for this model." He walked over to his workbench under the bright halogen light. I stood there, wiping sweat from my forehead with a handkerchief. It was 60 degrees outside, but I was burning up. I saw Russo pick up his case opener tool. He clamped the watch down. He twisted the back off. The moment the back case popped open, I expected him to tell me a gear was stripped. Instead, he froze. His shoulders went stiff. He leaned in closer. Then suddenly, he recoiled as if a snake had snapped at his face. He didn't just step back. He scrambled backward, knocking over a tray of tiny screws. "Get back!" he screamed. His voice cracked with genuine terror. "Get away from the counter!" I was confused. I took a step forward. "Mr. Russo, what is wrong? Did I break it?" "Don't come closer!" he yelled, grabbing a lead apron he used for something else and throwing it over the watch on the table. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. "Get out of the shop! No, wait! Lock the door! Don't let anyone in!" I was starting to get angry. The sickness made me irritable. I was a paying customer, and this man was acting like I had brought a bomb into his store. "Mr. Russo, I demand to know what is going on," I said, trying to stand up straight, summoning the dignity I had left. "That is a $5,000 watch." "It is not a watch," Russo hissed. He was reaching under his desk. He pulled out a yellow box with a wand attached to it. I recognized it immediately from my days working on industrial sites. It was a Geiger counter, a device used to measure radiation. "Why do you have that?" I asked. Russo didn't answer. He turned the dial. The machine let out a low, static hiss. He extended the wand toward the workbench, toward the lead apron covering my son's gift. At 3 feet away, the machine started clicking. Click, click, click. It sounded like dry leaves being crushed. Russo took a step closer, 2 feet away. The clicking turned into a buzz. Click, 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 click. He moved the wand right over the apron. The machine screamed. It was a continuous, high-pitched wail that drilled into my ears. The needle on the gauge slammed all the way to the right. hitting the red zone so hard I thought it would snap off. Russo turned the machine off and looked at me. His eyes were wide with fear and pity. "That is not a watch movement inside, Jeremiah," Russo said, his voice trembling. "I saw the soldering. Someone removed the mechanism. They replaced it with a capsule, a sealed source, probably cobalt-60 or cesium from an old industrial radiography unit." I stared at him. My engineer brain understood the words, but my father brain refused to process them. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I am saying that thing is a radioactive emitter," Russo said. "It is pumping out enough gamma rays to kill a horse." "How long have you been wearing this?" 3 months, I whispered. Russo made the sign of the cross. 3 months, right against your skin, directly into your bloodstream, into your bone marrow. The room began to spin. I grabbed the edge of the counter to keep from falling. Suddenly, everything made sense. The metallic taste in my mouth was not old age. It was the radiation destroying my taste buds. The hair on my pillow wasn't stress. It was cellular death. The nausea was my body trying to reject the poison that I was strapping to my wrist every single morning. I looked at the lead apron covering the watch. I felt a phantom burning sensation on my left wrist, where the metal had touched my skin for 90 days. "But why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why would there be radiation in a watch?" "This isn't an accident, Jeremiah," Russo said softly. "Someone put that there. Someone who knows what they are doing. The casing is lead-lined on the outside to stop the radiation from leaking out into the room. But the back? The part touching your arm? It was filed down thin. It was designed to direct the beam only one way, into you." I felt the vomit rising in my throat again. I rushed to the trash can in the corner of the shop and dry heaved. There was nothing left in my stomach but bile and betrayal. My son, Desmond. I thought about the day he gave it to me. It was my birthday party. He had been so proud. He stood up in front of everyone. He made a speech. He said, "Dad, you always have time for everyone else, so I wanted to give you some time for yourself." He had smiled, that wide, charming smile that he used to get out of trouble when he was a boy. He put the watch on my wrist himself. He adjusted the clasp. "Promise me you won't take it off, Dad," he had said. "It is a symbol of our bond. Our bond. A bond made of cobalt-60. I sank to the floor of the watch shop. The cold linoleum felt good against my feverish skin. I closed my eyes and I saw Desmond's face. But then I saw another face standing behind him. Courtney, my daughter-in-law. Courtney, who was a real estate agent. Courtney, who had been talking for months about how the property value of my brownstone house had skyrocketed to $2.5 million. Courtney, who constantly complained about their debts. I remembered a conversation I overheard 2 weeks ago. They thought I was asleep. "He is taking too long," Courtney had said. Her voice was sharp, impatient. "He is strong," Desmond had replied. "He is a tough old man. He is suffering," Courtney said. "We should put him in a home. It would be faster." At the time, I thought they were talking about my natural decline. I thought they were worried about my comfort. I thought they were trying to be kind. Now, I knew the truth. They weren't talking about nature. They were talking about the dosage. They were waiting for the cumulative effect of the gamma rays to shut down my organs. I looked up at Mr. Russo. He was on the phone. "I am calling the police," Russo said. "We need a hazmat team to secure this. You need to go to the emergency room immediately." "No!" I shouted. The force of my own voice surprised me. I struggled to my feet. I was dizzy, but the anger was burning through the fog in my brain. The anger was a fuel cleaner than anything I had ever felt. "Hang up the phone, Russo," I commanded. He hesitated. "Jeremiah, you are dying. This is attempted murder. If you call the police now, they will arrest Desmond," I said. "They will take the watch. It will be a crime scene." "Yes, that is exactly what should happen," Russo argued. "No," I said. "If they get arrested now, they get a lawyer. They plead ignorance. They say they bought the watch at a flea market and didn't know. They say it was a terrible accident. They get away with it. Or they get a light sentence." I walked over to the counter. I looked at the deadly package under the apron. "I want the watch back," I said. Russo looked at me like I had lost my mind. "You cannot wear that. It will finish you in a week." "I know," I said. "I am an engineer, Russo. I know how shielding works. I need you to take the source out. Put it in a lead box. Safe disposal. Then I need you to put a regular movement inside, or just weigh it down with lead so it feels the same." "Why?" Rousseau asked. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because," I said, my eyes narrowing as I thought about Courtney's fake smile and Desmond's cowardly eyes. "Because I am not dead yet, and I need them to believe that their plan is working. I need them to confess. I need to know exactly how deep this rot goes." Rousseau shook his head. "You are playing a dangerous game, Jeremiah. You need a hospital. You need blood transfusions." "I will go to the doctor," I said, "but not my doctor." I realized in that moment that my regular doctor, Dr. Sterling, must be in on it. He was the one who kept telling me it was just old age. He was the one who dismissed the burns on my wrist as eczema. Courtney must have paid him off, or threatened him. "I need you to fix the watch, Rousseau," I repeated. "Make it look exactly the same, but make it safe." Rousseau looked at me for a long time. He saw the fire in my eyes. He saw that the old man who had walked in shuffling his feet was gone. In his place was a father who had just been murdered by his own son, but refused to lie down in the grave. "Okay," Rousseau said quietly. "Come back tomorrow morning. But Jeremiah?" "Yes?" "Be careful. If they are willing to use radiation, they are monsters. They won't stop until they get what they want." I straightened my coat. I looked at my bare wrist. The skin was red and peeling, a raw circle of betrayal. "I know," I said. "They want my house. They want my money. They want me dead." I walked toward the door. The bell jingled again. "But they forgot one thing," I said, more to myself than to Rousseau. "They forgot that I built this family, and I know exactly how to dismantle it." I walked out into the rain. The water felt cool on my face. For the first time in 3 months, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a hunter. I took a cab straight to the university hospital, not the clinic I usually went to. I needed proof. I needed numbers. I needed to know exactly how much time I had left to teach my son the final lesson of his life. The doctor at the ER looked at my blood work an hour later. He looked at me with the same terror Rousseau had. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "you have acute radiation syndrome. We need to admit you to the ICU immediately. We need to notify the authorities. Who did this to you?" I looked at the doctor. I thought about Desmond. I thought about the way he used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. I thought about the monster he had become, to please a woman who wanted a mansion she didn't earn. "Nobody did this to me," I lied to the doctor. "It was an industrial accident a long time ago. It is just flaring up." I signed a waiver against medical advice. I took the pills they gave me to manage the symptoms. I put on my coat. I was going home. Courtney and Desmond were expecting a dying old man to walk through the door. They were expecting a victim. They were about to get a war. The walk from the hospital back to my brownstone in Chicago felt longer than any marathon I had ever run in my youth. Every step sent a jolt of pain up my shins. The medication the emergency room doctor gave me had dulled the sharpest edge of the nausea, but it could not touch the cold dread sitting in my gut. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the house I had bought 30 years ago. It was a beautiful structure with a limestone facade and large bay windows. I had worked double shifts for a decade to pay off the mortgage, so I could leave something substantial for my son. Now, looking at the warm yellow light spilling from the living room window, I did not see a home. I saw a battlefield, and the enemy was waiting inside with a roast chicken and a smile. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The smell of rosemary and garlic hit me instantly. 3 months ago, that smell would have made my mouth water. Today, it smelled like copper and betrayal. Courtney was the first to see me. She came rushing out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a designer apron that probably cost more than my first car. She was 30 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Dad, you are finally home," she chirped, coming in for a hug. I stiffened. I let her wrap her arms around me, but I did not hug her back. Her perfume was overpowering. It masked the scent of the house, just like her manners masked her intentions. "We were so worried," she said, pulling back to look at me. "You look pale. Desmond, come help your father with his coat." Desmond walked in from the living room. "My boy." He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he held a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was only 35, but he looked 50. He avoided my gaze as he took my heavy wool coat. "Hey, Pop," he mumbled. "How are you feeling?" "I am fine," I lied. "Just old age, son. Just old age." I walked toward the dining table, moving slowly, exaggerating my limp just a fraction more than necessary. I wanted them to see a frail old man. I wanted them to feel confident. Courtney pulled out my chair for me. As I sat down, I saw her eyes dart immediately to my left wrist. It was a reflex, fast and sharp. Her smile faltered for a microsecond before she composed herself. "Dad," she said, her voice dropping an octave into a tone of concern that sounded almost genuine. "Where's the watch? The beautiful chronograph Desmond gave you." I watched her carefully. A normal person might ask about my day or my health first, but Courtney went straight for the device. "Oh, that," I said, waving my hand dismissively. I took it off. It was feeling a bit heavy today. I think I left it at the barber shop down on 43rd Street. The reaction was instantaneous. Courtney dropped the serving spoon into the mashed potatoes with a loud clatter. Desmond froze, his glass of whiskey halfway to his mouth. "You left it?" Courtney asked, her voice shrill. "You left a $5,000 watch at a barber shop?" I shrugged, picking up my napkin. "Old Mr. Henderson will keep it safe for me. I will pick it up next week when I go back for a trim." "Next week?" Courtney looked at Desmond, her eyes wide with a panic that had nothing to do with the monetary value of the watch. "Desmond, you have to go get it. Now." Desmond looked at me, then at her. "It is late, Court. The shop is closed." "Call him," Courtney snapped. She turned back to me, trying to soften her expression, but the greed was leaking out of her pores. "Dad, we just don't want you to lose it. It is a symbol of Desmond's love. You should wear it all the time. You promised." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the way her eyes scanned the room as she spoke. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the crown molding. She was looking at the antique crystal chandelier. She was looking at the original hardwood floors. She was calculating the listing price. She was mentally staging the furniture for an open house. To her, I wasn't a person. I was an obstacle occupying a $2.5 million asset. I felt a sudden wave of disgust, so potent it almost made me gag. "I will get it back, Courtney," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Now, let us eat. I am starving." I forced myself to eat a forkful of potatoes. It tasted like ash. I watched them eat. Courtney was agitated, checking her phone under the table. Desmond was drinking his dinner, drowning his conscience in amber liquid. They were wolves, but they were sloppy wolves. They thought the sheep was asleep. They didn't know the sheep was counting their teeth. "Excuse me," I said, pushing my plate away after 5 minutes. "My stomach is acting up again." I stood up and shuffled toward the hallway bathroom. As soon as I closed the door and locked it, the facade dropped. My legs gave out and I collapsed in front of the toilet. My body convulsed. I retched violently, expelling the little food I had eaten. The radiation wasn't just a concept. It was a physical intruder, tearing apart my cells from the inside out. I gripped the porcelain bowl, sweat dripping from my forehead. My gums were bleeding again. I spat red saliva into the water and flushed it away. I sat on the cold tile floor, leaning my head against the wall. This bathroom shared a wall with the dining room. It was an old house, and while the walls were thick, the ventilation ducts carried sound perfectly if you knew where to listen. I had installed these ducts myself in 1995. I knew every acoustic quirk of this building. I held my breath and listened. "You have to go there in the morning and break in if you have to," Courtney's voice hissed through the vent. "Calm down, Court," Desmond whispered. "It is just a few days. Maybe it is good he takes a break from it. He looks terrible." "That is the point, Desmond." She slammed something onto the table, probably her hand. "We do not have a few days. The bridge loan is due on the 1st of the month. If we don't get power of attorney soon, we lose the condo downtown. We lose the cars. We lose everything." "We can ask him for a loan," Desmond pleaded. His voice broke. "He is my dad. He has money saved. He won't give us $200,000 to cover your gambling debts, Desmond," Courtney shouted, though she tried to keep it to a whisper. "And he certainly won't cover my failed investments. We are in a hole, a deep hole. This is the only way out. The doctor said consistent exposure is key. If the levels drop, his marrow might start to recover. We need him weak. We need him confused. We need him gone." I sat frozen on the bathroom floor. The cold from the tiles seeped into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the chill in my heart. Hearing it confirmed was different from suspecting it. My son, my own flesh and blood. He wasn't just standing by. He was negotiating the timeline of my murder. "He is suffering, Court," Desmond said. "I hate seeing him like this." "Do you hate it more than you hate prison?" Courtney asked. Her voice was ice cold. "Because that is where we are going if the creditors find out we falsified those loan applications. We need the inheritance. We need to sell this house. It is the only way to fix what you broke." There was a silence, a long, heavy silence. "I will call the barber in the morning," Desmond said finally. His voice was defeated, a hollow shell of a man. "Good," Courtney said. "Now finish your drink. We have to pretend to be happy." I pulled myself up using the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror. My skin was gray. My eyes were bloodshot. I looked like a ghost. And in a way, I was. The Jeremiah Brooks who had sat down to dinner 10 minutes ago was dead. He died on that bathroom floor. I washed my face with cold water. I scrubbed the blood from my lips. I straightened my spine. I was not going to die in this bathroom. I was not going to let them win. I unlocked the door and walked back out. They stopped talking immediately. "Are you okay, Dad?" Desmond asked. He sounded scared. "Just something I ate," I said. "I think I will go to bed. I am very tired." I climbed the stairs to my bedroom. Every step was a battle. My joints ached. My skin felt like it was sunburned. I closed my door and locked it. I went to my bedside table and opened the drawer. Inside was a picture of my late wife, Sarah. She had passed away 5 years ago from a heart attack. It was sudden, peaceful. She never had to see what our son had become. I took the photo out and held it to my chest. I curled up on the bed, not bothering to change out of my clothes. The physical pain was excruciating. It felt like tiny needles were pricking every inch of my body. The radiation burns on my wrist throbbed in time with my heartbeat. But the mental anguish was worse. I replayed every memory of Desmond, teaching him to catch a baseball, watching him graduate from college, the day he married Courtney. I had been suspicious of her then, but I kept my mouth shut because I wanted him to be happy. I had failed him. I had raised a man so weak that he would sacrifice his own father for a luxury car and a condo. I lay there in the dark, listening to the old house settle. I heard them downstairs, moving around, laughing at the television. They were celebrating their cleverness. They thought I was upstairs dying quietly. Tears leaked from my eyes, hot and stinging. I let myself cry for exactly 10 minutes. I mourned the son I thought I had. I mourned the family I had built. Then, I stopped. I wiped my face on the rough wool of my sleeve. I stared up at the ceiling fan spinning slowly in the darkness. I remembered the Geiger counter screaming in the watch shop. I remembered Mr. Rousseau's terrified face. I remembered the loan sharks Courtney mentioned. They wanted a victim. They wanted a confused, sick old man who would sign a piece of paper and then politely stop breathing. They had messed with the wrong engineer. I sat up in bed. The pain was still there, but now I had a place to put it. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was going to be a hunter. I needed to know everything. I needed evidence. I needed to know where every dollar went. I needed to know who else was involved. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I opened the browser and searched for spy cameras and audio recording devices. "I am not dying yet," I whispered to the empty room. I looked at the empty spot on my wrist. "You want time?" I thought. "I will give you time, but it won't be the kind you want." I lay back down, but I did not sleep. I spent the rest of the night plotting. Every beam in this house I had sanded. Every pipe I had fixed. This was my territory, and I was about to turn it into a trap. The waiting room of Dr. Whitman's private clinic smelled of lavender and expensive leather. It was the kind of place where the magazines on the table were architectural digests rather than gossip rags, and the receptionist spoke in a whisper that suggested she was doing you a favor by acknowledging your existence. Courtney had insisted I come here 3 months ago when the nausea started. She said Dr. Whitman was a concierge doctor for the elite. She said he was the best. Now as I sat on the plush velvet chair clutching my stomach, I realized he was not a doctor. He was a paid actor in a tragedy where I was the main character. Jeremiah the nurse called out. She did not look up from her tablet. I stood up. My knees popped loudly in the quiet room. I walked back to the exam room, which was decorated with abstract art that looked like bruises. I sat on the crinkly paper and waited. 10 minutes later, Dr. Whitman breezed in. He was a tall man with a tan that was too orange for a Chicago winter, and teeth that were too white for a human being. "Jeremiah, good to see you," he said, not making eye contact as he washed his hands. "How are we feeling today?" "I feel like I am dying, doctor," I said, my voice raspy. "My hair is falling out in clumps. I threw up blood this morning. The sores on my wrist are not healing." Whitman sighed, the way a parent sighs at a toddler who won't eat his peas. He picked up my chart and pretended to read it. "We have discussed this, Jeremiah. It is aggressive lymphoma, combined with the natural degradation of your age. The chemotherapy pills I prescribed should be managing the symptoms, but sometimes the body just shuts down." He turned to me and smiled a sad, practiced smile. "At 70, the body is tired. It is telling us it is time to rest." I looked at him. I looked at his expensive watch. I looked at the diploma on the wall that claimed he swore an oath to do no harm. "So it is definitely cancer?" I asked, keeping my face neutral. "The markers are undeniable," Whitman said. "That is strange," I said, leaning forward slightly, "because I looked up the symptoms of lymphoma last night. They usually include swollen lymph nodes. Mine are fine. But you know what causes hair loss, nausea, and skin burns in a localized area?" Whitman stopped smiling. "What are you implying, Jeremiah?" I rolled up my sleeve. I shoved my raw, peeling wrist under his nose. The skin was red and blistered, exactly in the shape of the watch case back. "Does this look like cancer to you, doctor? Or does it look like a radiation burn?" Whitman flinched. He pulled back as if I had slapped him. He walked over to the sink and turned his back to me. "It is contact dermatitis, Jeremiah, an allergic reaction to the metal of your watch strap, combined with the cancer treatments. You are confused. This happens with late-stage patients. The brain gets foggy." I stared at his back. He was lying. He was lying, and he was bad at it. A real doctor would have ordered a biopsy of the skin. A real doctor would have asked if I had been near chemicals. Whitman just wanted to dismiss it. "Courtney pays you well, doesn't she?" I asked softly. Whitman spun around. His face was red. "I think you should leave, Jeremiah. I will call Courtney and tell her the dementia is setting in. We need to increase your sedation. For your own comfort." I stood up. The anger gave me a temporary burst of strength. "You do that," I said. "You call her. Tell her I am confused. Tell her I am dying." I walked to the door. I stopped and looked back at him. "But remember this, doctor. When the ship sinks, the rats drown first." I slammed the door behind me. I did not stop at the reception desk. I walked straight out into the cold wind. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from confirmation. Whitman wasn't just incompetent. He was an accomplice. Courtney hadn't just found a bad doctor. She had found a corrupt one. She probably promised him a cut of the house sale, or maybe she had something on him. It didn't matter. He was another name on my list. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of the University Medical Center. It was on the other side of town. It was a teaching hospital. It was chaotic, loud, and full of bright lights. It was exactly where I needed to be. I checked myself into the emergency room under a fake address. I told the triage nurse I was a retired welder who had been exposed to industrial waste. I did not mention the watch. I did not mention my son. I needed raw data without the police involvement yet. When the ER doctor came in, he looked nothing like Whitman. He was young, tired, and had coffee stains on his scrubs. His badge said Dr. Patel. He looked at my blood test results, and then he looked at me with horror. "Mr. Brooks," he said, his voice shaking, "we need to evacuate this room. We need to call the CDC." "Why?" I asked calmly. "Your white blood cell count is almost zero," Dr. Patel said. "Your platelets are non-existent. But the scary part is the presence of cesium-137 in your blood work. You are radioactive, Mr. Brooks. You are a walking dirty bomb." I nodded. I knew it. Hearing a real doctor say it was strangely comforting. It meant I wasn't crazy. "How long do I have?" I asked. Dr. Patel dropped his clipboard. "How long? Mr. Brooks, you need to be in isolation. We need to start chelation therapy immediately. We need to find the source. This is a crime. Someone did this to you." "I know," I said. "Then let me call the police." Dr. Patel reached for the wall phone. "No," I said sharply. I sat up on the gurney. The paper gown crinkled. "If you call the police now, the people who did this will get away, Dr. Patel. They will destroy the evidence. They will claim it was an accident. I need 24 hours. You don't have 24 hours, Patel argued. You might bleed out internally at any moment. Your immune system is gone. A common cold could kill you right now. I have survived worse, I said, thinking of the Vietnam War and the winter of '78. I grabbed the doctor's arm. Please, I need to protect my legacy. I need to make sure they don't hurt anyone else. Patel looked at me. He saw the desperation in my eyes. He saw the engineer who had calculated the load-bearing capacity of his own soul. I cannot legally let you leave, he whispered. I will sign the against medical advice form, I said. Just give me the papers. And give me copies of these test results. Hide my name on them if you have to, but I need the proof. 10 minutes later, I was walking out of the hospital with a packet of papers tucked inside my coat. I felt lighter. I had the weapon. Now I just needed to aim it. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was dark. The house loomed over me like a mausoleum. I unlocked the door and stepped into the warmth. Courtney was waiting in the living room. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, holding a folder. She jumped up when she saw me. "Dad," she exclaimed. "Dr. Whitman called me. He said you were very agitated today. He said you were talking nonsense about the watch." I took off my coat slowly. "I was tired, Courtney. I just want the pain to stop." "I know," she said, walking over to me. She didn't touch me this time. Maybe Whitman warned her I was radioactive. "I know you are in pain, Dad. That is why we need to handle some things, just in case." She opened the folder. Inside was a thick document. "This is a medical power of attorney," she said, "and a do not resuscitate order. It just means that if you fall into a coma, or if your heart stops, we won't let the doctors break your ribs with CPR. We will let you go peacefully. It is what you would want, right?" I looked at the paper. It was a death warrant. She wanted the legal right to pull the plug the moment I closed my eyes. She wanted to make sure I didn't wake up and change the will. I looked at her face. It was the face of a shark smelling blood. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Courtney blinked. She expected a fight. She had her arguments ready. My compliance threw her off balance. "Oh, right here, at the bottom." She handed me a pen, a heavy, expensive fountain pen that I had bought for Desmond when he graduated law school. He never practiced law, but he kept the pen. I sat down at the dining table. The wood felt cool under my hand. I looked at the line for the signature. If I signed this legally, she could kill me tonight. She could overdose me on morphine and tell the police it was mercy. But if the signature was invalid, the document was trash. My legal signature on all my bank accounts, on the deed to the house, and on my will was always Jeremiah T. Brooks. The T stood for Thomas, my father's name. I never signed anything without that middle initial. It was a habit drilled into me by my father, who said a black man in America needs to be precise with his paperwork, or they will take everything he has. I put the pen to the paper. My hand shook. This time, I didn't have to fake the tremor. I wrote Jeremiah Brooks, no middle initial, and I slanted the letters to the left instead of my usual right. "There," I said, pushing the paper back to her. Courtney snatched it up. She didn't even look at the signature. She just saw ink on paper and saw dollar signs. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice thick with fake emotion. "We will take good care of you." I stood up and looked at her. "I know you will, Courtney. I know exactly how you take care of things." I walked toward the stairs. I needed to sleep. Tomorrow was the party. Tomorrow, I would wear the watch. Tomorrow, I would introduce my daughter-in-law to the only thing stronger than her greed, the truth. As I climbed the stairs, I heard her pull out her phone. "It is done," she whispered. He signed it. "Call the realtor. Tell him we can list the house on Monday." I smiled in the darkness. Monday. She thought she had until Monday. She didn't know that her timeline had just been cut short. The engineer was back on the job, and I was about to bring the whole structure down on their heads. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2 in the morning, but sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. My body was exhausted. The radiation was eating away at my marrow, making every bone feel like it was wrapped in barbed wire. But my mind was wide open. I lay in the dark, listening to the silence of the house I had built into a home. Then I heard it, the stumbling footsteps on the stairs, the heavy breathing of a man trying to be quiet and failing miserably. It was Desmond. The door to my bedroom creaked open. The smell hit me before he even crossed the threshold. It was a sour mixture of expensive bourbon and fear. I kept my eyes closed, breathing in a slow, rhythmic pattern, feigning the deep sleep of the dying. I felt the mattress dip as he sat down on the edge of the bed. I felt his hand hover over my shoulder before retracting, as if he were afraid I might burn him. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was thick with tears and alcohol. "I am so sorry, Dad." I remained motionless. A part of me, the father who had held him when he scraped his knee, wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but the engineer in me, the man who had seen the Geiger counter scream, knew better. This was not an apology. This was a confession without repentance. "I don't know what else to do," Desmond sobbed quietly. I laid there, listening to my 35-year-old son cry like a child. I waited for him to say he would stop it. I waited for him to say he would take the watch away and drive me to a hospital. I waited for him to choose me over her. "She says it is the only way," he mumbled to the darkness. "She says we will lose everything if we don't do this. I don't want you to hurt Dad, but I can't go to jail. I can't lose Courtney. She will leave me." My heart didn't break in that moment. It shattered. It turned into dust. He wasn't crying because I was dying. He was crying because he felt guilty about killing me. There is a massive difference. He was mourning his own conscience, not his father's life. He was trading my blood for his marriage to a woman who saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone. "You had a good life, right, Dad?" Desmond continued wiping his nose on his sleeve. "You are tired. Maybe it is better this way. Just going to sleep. It is peaceful. Peaceful." He called agonizing radiation poisoning peaceful. He called betraying the man who paid for his college tuition peaceful. He sat there for another 10 minutes weeping for himself. Then he stood up. "Goodbye, Dad," he whispered. He didn't check my pulse. He didn't fix my blanket. He just walked out and closed the door, leaving me in the darkness with the truth. My son was not a victim. He was a coward. And cowards are dangerous because they will do anything to avoid facing themselves. I opened my eyes in the dark. The tears that flowed down my cheeks were cold. I wiped them away with a hand that was shaking not from fear, but from a cold, calculated rage. That was the last time I would cry for Desmond Brooks. The next time he saw tears on my face, they would be part of the performance. The next morning, I waited until I heard the distinct sound of Courtney's Mercedes pulling out of the driveway, followed by Desmond's sedan. They were gone. I had the house to myself for at least 4 hours. It was time to go to work. I dragged my aching body out of bed. I went to the closet where I kept my old tool belt. It hung there like a relic from a past life. Putting it on felt like putting on armor. I was no longer the sick old man. I was the engineer. I was the fixer. I had ordered the cameras weeks ago from a specialized supplier intended for security at a rental property I used to own. I never used them. Now they were my only weapon. They were tiny pinhole cameras no bigger than a button, designed to be hidden in smoke detectors and vents. I started in the living room. I needed a vantage point that covered the safe and the dining table where they plotted. I dragged a heavy wooden chair to the center of the room. My legs trembled under the strain. Sweat poured down my back, stinging the sores on my skin. I gritted my teeth, forcing my body to obey. I climbed onto the chair, feeling the room spin. I reached up to the smoke detector on the ceiling. My fingers were clumsy. The dexterity I once had was gone, stolen by the poison in my veins. I dropped a screw. It fell to the hardwood floor with a loud ping. I cursed silently and climbed down to find it. It took me 5 minutes to crawl on the floor and locate the tiny piece of metal. I was gasping for air, my chest heaving. I climbed back up. I wired the camera into the detector's power supply so it wouldn't need batteries. I positioned the lens perfectly. 1 down, 3 to go. I moved to the kitchen, then the hallway. Finally, I moved to my study where the wall safe was located. This was the most important one. I was halfway up the stepladder in the study when I heard the front door unlock. Courtney. She was back early. 3 hours early. Panic flared in my chest. I was standing on a ladder, holding a screwdriver with the vent cover removed. If she saw me, she would know I wasn't the frail invalid I pretended to be. She would know I had energy. She would know I was up to something. I heard her heels clicking on the floor. She was heading straight for the study. I couldn't get down in time. I couldn't hide the tools. I made a split-second decision. I didn't hide. I started banging on the vent with the handle of the screwdriver, making as much noise as possible. Dad. Courtney's voice rang out sharp and suspicious from the doorway. What in the world are you doing up there? I turned around slowly, trying to make my movements look erratic and confused. I blinked at her, my mouth slightly open. The rats, I mumbled, slurring my words. The rats are in the walls, Courtney. Can't you hear them? They are scratching my bones. I hit the vent again. Get out of my house. Courtney stared at me. Her suspicion warred with her disgust. She saw an old man in his pajamas standing on a ladder fighting imaginary vermin. She didn't see an engineer installing surveillance. She saw dementia. Dad, get down from there immediately, she snapped, walking over and grabbing my leg. There are no rats. You are hallucinating again. This is exactly why Dr. Whitman said you need to be sedated. You are going to fall and break a hip, and I do not have time to deal with that today. I let the screwdriver fall from my hand. It clattered to the floor, but the noise I whimpered, allowing her to help me down. It is so loud. It is just the house settling, Dad, she said, guiding me to the leather armchair. She looked at the vent. It was crooked, but she didn't look closely. She didn't see the tiny black lens peering out from the darkness of the duct. I forgot my portfolio, she muttered, grabbing a leather folder from the desk. Stay here. Do not climb on anything else. Desmond will be home in an hour to watch you. She looked at me with pure contempt. She straightened her blazer, turned on her heel, and marched out. I waited until I heard the car start. I waited until the engine faded down the street. Then I stood up. I walked over to the vent and finished screwing it in place. My hands were steady now. Her arrogance was her blind spot. She thought I was losing my mind. She didn't realize I was just sharpening it. I retreated to my bedroom and locked the door. I pulled out my old laptop, which I kept hidden under the floorboards beneath my bed. I connected to the secure server I had set up. The screen flickered to life. 4 quadrants appeared, showing black and white feeds of my home. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, the study. The image was crisp. I could see the dust motes dancing in the sunlight in the living room. I could see the unwashed dishes in the sink. I rewound the footage from the study camera to 5 minutes before I had entered the room. I wanted to see what Courtney did when she came in to get her portfolio. I watched the screen. Courtney entered the frame. She didn't go straight for the portfolio. She went to my desk. She opened the top drawer and rifled through my papers. Then she moved to the painting on the wall that hid the wall safe. My breath caught in my throat. She moved the painting aside. She stared at the keypad of the safe. She pulled a small piece of paper from her pocket and punched in a code. The safe didn't open. I had changed the combination 3 days ago. She punched it in again, harder this time. When the red light flashed denying her access, she kicked the wall. "Damn old fool," she hissed. The microphone picked up her voice clearly. He must have changed it. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "He changed the code," she said, to whoever was on the other end. "No, I couldn't get the deed. We have to move up the timeline. The party is on Saturday. We get him to announce the transfer of assets publicly. Then we increase the dose on Sunday. By Tuesday, it will be over." She hung up and grabbed the portfolio, then turned to leave. I sat back in my chair, my blood running cold. I watched the video again. I saved it. I backed it up to the cloud and then to a USB drive. This wasn't just greed anymore. This was a premeditated timeline for execution. I looked at the face of the woman on the screen. Beautiful, composed, and deadly. She was frustrated that the safe didn't open. She didn't know that the real treasure wasn't in the safe. The real treasure was the footage I was watching right now. I closed the laptop. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The doubt was gone. The hesitation was gone. The father who hoped for a misunderstanding was dead and buried. "You want the deed, Courtney?" I whispered to the empty room. "You want the assets." I looked at the calendar on the wall. Saturday. The party. "I will give you everything you deserve," I said. "Every single thing." The place was called Golden Oak Manor. The brochure Courtney showed me in the car featured smiling seniors playing chess in a sunlit garden, and nurses who looked like angels in scrubs. She kept tapping the glossy paper with her manicured fingernail, saying it was a resort, a place where I could rest and recover with people my own age. She said it cost $6,000 a month, but they were willing to pay it because they loved me. I sat in the passenger seat of her Mercedes and said nothing. I knew better. In my line of work, you learn that a fresh coat of paint usually hides a rusted beam. When we pulled up to the building, the first thing I noticed was the fence. It was high chain link topped with barbed wire that had been painted green to look less industrial. They called it security. I called it a prison perimeter. We walked into the lobby. It smelled of lavender air freshener, but underneath that heavy floral scent was the unmistakable odor of bleach and stale urine. It was the smell of neglect masked by chemicals. Courtney didn't seem to notice, or maybe she just didn't care. She was too busy charming the administrator, a woman named Ms. Trunch, who had a smile that disappeared the second she stopped talking. "This is Jeremiah," Ms. Trunch said, looking at me as if I were a piece of luggage. "He looks very frail. We have a wonderful palliative care wing. Very quiet." I looked around while they discussed my deposit. I saw a water stain spreading across the ceiling tiles above the reception desk. Brown and ugly. It meant the pipes were leaking. I saw an elderly woman in a wheelchair slumped over in the corner, drooling onto her blouse. A nurse walked past her 3 times without stopping to help. The nurse was on her phone, texting. "Courtney," I whispered, tugging on her sleeve. "This place is dirty. Look at the floor. Look at the patients." Courtney batted my hand away gently, but firmly. "Don't be difficult, Dad. It is just lunchtime. They are busy. This is a 5-star facility. It has the best reviews online." "Reviews can be bought," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I am not staying here. It smells like death." Courtney turned on me. Her eyes flashed with that cold fury she usually saved for waiters who got her order wrong. "You are staying where we can afford, Dad," she hissed. "Do you have any idea how expensive your care is becoming? This is the best we can do. Stop being ungrateful." She turned back to Ms. Trunch and smiled. "He is just tired. The dementia makes him paranoid. We will bring the paperwork tomorrow." I looked at the old woman in the corner again. She lifted her head and locked eyes with me. There was no hope in those eyes, only a silent plea for an end. I realized then that Courtney wasn't paying for care. She was paying for accelerated depreciation. She was putting me in a warehouse to expire. We left the building, but I didn't leave the memory of that smell behind. It stuck to my clothes. It fueled the fire in my belly. When we got back to the brownstone, there was a silver sedan parked in my driveway. A man in a suit that cost more than my first year's salary was standing by the gate checking his watch. "This is Brad Courtney," said, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror. "He is a real estate specialist. He is just here to give us an appraisal, Dad, for insurance purposes." Lies. Another layer of lies. We got out of the car. Brad walked up to us with a predatory grin. He shook Courtney's hand vigorously. He barely nodded at me. "So this is the property," he said, looking up at my home. "Great bones, pre-war construction. The market is hot for these right now, especially with the gentrification moving west." He walked past me up the steps of my porch. I followed them, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. Inside, Brad walked around tapping on walls and looking at the floors. I sat in my armchair, the one Courtney hated because it was old leather and didn't match her aesthetic. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pressed the record button on my phone. "The layout is a bit dated," Brad said, standing in the middle of the living room. "We would need to knock out this wall to create an open concept, and the kitchen needs to be gutted." Courtney nodded enthusiastically. Exactly what I thought. And all this old furniture would go, obviously. She gestured to the dining table my father had built by hand. She gestured to the bookshelf filled with Sarah's favorite novels. "What about the owner?" Brad asked, lowering his voice slightly, glancing in my direction. I sat staring blankly at the television, pretending to be deaf and senile. "Oh, don't worry about him," Courtney said loud enough for me to hear. "He is moving to a facility this week. And frankly, Brad, looking at his medical charts, I don't think he will be an issue for very long. We are looking for a quick sale. As soon as the title clears." Brad nodded, making notes on his iPad. "So, we are talking about a probate sale, essentially, or a liquidation by the executor." "Executor," Courtney said, tasting the word like fine wine. "Yes. Desmond has power of attorney. We want to list it quietly now and go live the day he passes. We need the liquidity." I gripped the armrest of my chair. My knuckles turned white. They were discussing the destruction of my legacy while I was sitting 5 feet away. They were planning to gut my home, and erase my existence before my body was even cold. They walked into the kitchen, discussing square footage and commission rates. I pulled my phone out. I stopped the recording. I had it. I had her stating intent. I had her acknowledging my impending death as a business transaction. Brad left 20 minutes later, promising to send over a contract. Courtney went upstairs to call Desmond. I waited until the house was quiet. Then I went to the basement. It was the one place Courtney never went because she was afraid of spiders. It was my sanctuary. I had a landline down there that wasn't connected to the main house system. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Althea Gibson picked up on the second ring. She was the best estate attorney in Chicago and my late wife's sorority sister. She was sharp, tough, and loyal. "Jeremiah," she said, her voice warm. "I haven't heard from you since the funeral. How are you holding up?" "I am not holding up, Althea," I said, my voice steady. "I am being murdered." There was a silence on the line, then the sound of a chair shifting. "Talk to me, Jeremiah." I told her everything. The watch, the radiation, the fake doctor, the nursing home, the real estate agent. I told her about the camera footage and the audio recordings. "I want to nail them, Althea," I said. "I don't just want to survive. I want to destroy their greed. I want to make sure they never hurt anyone else." I could hear Althea breathing hard on the other end. She was angry. I knew that breathing. It was the sound of a lioness getting ready to hunt. "We need to move fast, Jeremiah," she said. "Do you have the deed to the house?" "It is in the safe," I said, "but Courtney can't open it yet." "Good," Althea said. "Here is what we are going to do. We are going to create an irrevocable trust. We are going to move the house, your savings, and your life insurance into it, tonight. I will drive over with the papers. I will park down the street. You meet me at the back alley." "And the beneficiary?" I asked. "Who do you want it to be?" Althea asked. "The STEM Scholarship Fund for Inner City Kids," I said. "The one Sarah always supported." "Consider it done," Althea said. "But Jeremiah, there is one more thing. If we transfer the assets now, they will find out when they try to list the house." "No," I said. "They won't check the title until Monday. That is what the agent said." "Good," Althea said. "Then we have time for the final act." "One more thing, Althea," I said. "I need you to draft a new will, and I need you to be at my house on Saturday." "Saturday?" Althea asked. "Yes," I said. "I am throwing a party, a farewell party, and I want you to read the will out loud." I could hear the smile in Althea's voice. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Jeremiah." I hung up the phone. I looked around my basement. My tools were hanging on the wall. My workbench was dusty. I wasn't just fixing a broken appliance anymore. I was fixing a broken justice system. I was fixing my own mistake of raising a son who didn't know the value of a human life. I walked back upstairs. Courtney was in the kitchen humming to herself. She looked happy. She thought she had won. She thought the game was over. She didn't know the referee had just blown the whistle for the second half. The smell of roasting garlic and heavy cream drifted up the stairs, and it terrified me more than the radiation burns on my wrist. In the 5 years since she married my son, Courtney had never so much as boiled an egg. She ordered takeout or she made Desmond cook. But today, the house smelled like a French bistro. I walked down the stairs, gripping the banister until my knuckles turned white. Courtney was in the kitchen, wearing an apron over her silk blouse, stirring a pot on the stove. "Dad," she said, turning to me with a smile that showed too many teeth. "You need to keep your strength up. I made you my special mushroom bisque. It is full of vitamins." She ladled a thick gray liquid into a bowl. It steamed in the cold kitchen air. She placed it on the table in front of me and stood there, watching. She didn't serve herself. She didn't serve Desmond. She just watched me. I looked at the soup. Mushroom soup has a strong, earthy flavor. It is the perfect vehicle to mask the bitter taste of crushed pills or liquid arsenic. I picked up my spoon. My hand trembled, and for once, I didn't have to fake it. "It smells delicious, Courtney," I said, "but my stomach is still very unsettled. Can I take it to my room? I will eat it slowly while I rest." Her smile faltered for a second, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, Dad. Just make sure you eat it all. You look so thin." I carried the bowl upstairs. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Once I was locked in my room, I went into the bathroom and poured the soup into a plastic container I had saved. I washed the bowl in the sink to make it look used. Then I waited until nightfall. At midnight, I crept down the back stairs to the garden. There was a stray cat I called Buster, who had been visiting my porch for years. He was a tough old fighter with a torn ear just like me. I usually gave him a tin of tuna, but tonight I needed to know the truth. I poured half the soup into his bowl. "Forgive me, Buster," I whispered. "I pray that I am wrong. I pray that she is just a bad cook and not a murderer." Buster ate it hungrily. I watched him lick the bowl clean. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Please let the cat be okay. Please let my daughter-in-law be innocent of this one thing. The next morning I went down to the garden before the sun came up. My prayers had not been answered. Buster was lying by the rose bushes. He wasn't sleeping. His body was stiff and his eyes were wide open, covered in a milky film. There was foam around his mouth. I fell to my knees in the dirt. I touched his cold fur. He hadn't just died, he had suffered. The poison had worked fast, and it had been violent. I sat there in the wet grass and felt a darkness take over my soul. This wasn't just greed anymore. This was evil, pure, distilled evil. She hadn't waited for the radiation to finish me off. She had grown impatient. She wanted the house now. I stood up. I didn't bury Buster immediately. I left him there. I needed Desmond to see this. I needed to see if my son had any humanity left, or if he was completely hollowed out. I went back inside and waited. An hour later, Desmond walked out onto the patio with his morning coffee. I watched him from the kitchen window. I saw the moment he spotted the cat. He dropped his mug. It shattered on the stone pavers. He ran over to the animal and recoiled, covering his mouth. "Oh God," he yelled. "Oh my God." Courtney came running out in her bathrobe. "What is it? What happened?" Desmond pointed at the dead cat. "Look at it, Courtney. Just look at it. I saw Dad feeding it last night. He gave it the soup you made." Courtney looked at the cat, and then she shrugged. "It is just a stray, Desmond. It probably ate a rat." Desmond grabbed her shoulders. He was shaking. "There is foam on its mouth, Court. That is poison. You put something in the soup, didn't you? You tried to kill him." I pressed my ear against the glass. This was it. This was the moment Desmond would finally stand up. Courtney slapped his hands away. Her face became a mask of stone. "Lower your voice," she hissed. "Do you want the neighbors to hear you?" "I don't care about the neighbors," Desmond screamed. "You are poisoning my father. The watch was one thing. You said it would be slow. You said it would look like an illness." "This is murder, Courtney. Cold-blooded murder. I am going to the police. I can't do this anymore." He turned to walk back into the house. I held my breath. "Do it, son. Be the man I raised." Courtney didn't chase him. She didn't panic. She just stood there and spoke 3 sentences that stopped him dead in his tracks. "Go ahead, Desmond. Go to the police. And tell them who bought the watch." Desmond froze. "Tell them who signed the check for the $5,000. Courtney continued, her voice calm and terrifying. "Tell them who is drowning in gambling debt. Tell them who has the motive. I am just the concerned wife. You are the desperate son who took out a life insurance policy on his father last month. Who do you think the jury will believe?" Desmond turned back to her. His face was pale. "You wouldn't. We did this together." "There is no we in prison, Desmond," she said, crossing her arms. "If I go down, I will paint you as the mastermind. I will say you forced me. I have clean hands. You have the receipt for the watch." Desmond looked at her, and then he looked at the dead cat. I saw the fight leave his body. His shoulders slumped. He looked like a balloon that had lost all its air. "What do we do with the cat?" he whispered. "Get a shovel," Courtney said, "and bury it deep. And Desmond," he looked up at her, his eyes dead, "make sure your father eats his lunch today. We can't afford any more waste." I stepped away from the window. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. My son was gone. The boy I had raised was buried in that garden with the cat. All that was left was a husk, controlled by fear, and a woman with a heart made of coal. That afternoon, a package arrived. It was delivered by a courier service that required a signature. I intercepted it before Courtney could get to the door. It was heavy. I took it to the basement. Inside was a black velvet box. I opened it, and there it was, the gold chronograph. It looked exactly the same as the one that had poisoned me. But when I picked it up, it felt different. Mr. Russo had done his work. He had removed the radioactive core. He had lined the case with lead just to be sure, and weighted it perfectly to match the original. But the most important modification was invisible. Inside the mechanism where the gears used to turn, Russo had installed a high-fidelity audio recorder with a battery life of 48 hours. It was voice-activated. I put the watch on my wrist. The metal felt cold against my skin, but it no longer burned. It felt like justice. I looked at my reflection in the basement window. I looked tired. I looked sick. But I also looked dangerous. I walked upstairs. Courtney and Desmond were in the living room. When I walked in wearing the watch, Courtney's eyes lit up. "You found it," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes," I said, touching the gold bezel. "I found it right where I left it. I will never take it off again. I promise." Desmond looked away, unable to meet my eyes. He knew what that watch meant. He thought it meant I would be dead in a week. He was wrong. It meant they would be in handcuffs in 48 hours. I sat down in my chair. The recorder was rolling. So I said, looking at my daughter-in-law, "Tell me about the party on Saturday. I want everything to be perfect." Courtney laughed. "Oh, don't worry, Dad. It will be a night no one will ever forget." I smiled back at her. On that point, we finally agreed. The face looking back at me from the bathroom mirror was already half dead, but I needed it to look worse. I needed to look like a man with hours left, not days. I opened the bottom drawer of the vanity where Sarah used to keep her makeup. It had been 5 years, but the smell of her lavender face powder still lingered. It was a scent that used to bring me comfort, but today it was just a tool for my deception. I took a soft brush and dusted the pale powder over my cheeks and forehead. I shaded the hollows under my eyes with a gray eyeshadow she used to wear to church. The result was terrifying. I looked like a corpse that had been left out in the rain. I shuffled back to the bed. My breathing was already labored because of the radiation damage, but I forced myself to make it sound wetter. I practiced the rattle in my throat. It was the sound of fluid filling the lungs, the sound of the end. I lay down and pulled the heavy quilt up to my chin. The gold watch on my wrist felt heavy, but it was a comforting weight now. The recording device inside was humming quietly, waiting for its prey. I waited. It didn't take long. Courtney knocked once and entered without waiting for an answer. She was wearing a bright yellow dress that seemed offensively cheerful for a house filled with sickness. "Dad," she called out, "I brought you some water." I didn't answer immediately. I let out a long, shuddering breath that ended in a choke. Courtney dropped the glass. It bounced on the carpet and spilled. She rushed to the side of the bed. Her eyes scanned my face, taking in the gray skin and the sweat on my brow. "Dad," she whispered, "can you hear me?" I fluttered my eyelids open. I let my eyes roll back slightly before focusing on her. "Courtney," I rasped, "it is cold. It is so cold." She put her hand on my forehead. Her hand was cool and dry. She didn't check my pulse. She didn't reach for her phone to call 911. She stood up straight and pulled her phone from her pocket. "Stay calm, Dad," she said. "I'm going to make a call." She walked to the window, turning her back to me. I closed my eyes, but I sharpened my ears. "Stan," she whispered into the phone, "it is happening. No, it is faster than we thought. He looks terrible. He is gray. Yes, I have the paperwork ready. No, he hasn't signed the deed transfer yet, but I have the power of attorney. Get over here now. Bring the notary. We need to do this tonight." She hung up and turned back to me. Her face shifted instantly from businesslike efficiency to a mask of concerned grief. "I called the doctor." "Dad," she lied smoothly. "He is on his way. Just try to relax." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who was so eager to bury me that she had a notary on speed dial instead of an ambulance. "Desmond," I whispered, "where's my son?" "He is downstairs," she said. "He can't bear to see you like this. He is very sensitive, you know." Sensitive. That was her word for weak. That was her word for a man who would let his wife murder his father because he was too afraid to get a job. "Tell him to come up," I said. "And stay here, Courtney. I need to talk to you." She hesitated. She wanted to go downstairs and celebrate. She wanted to start measuring the windows for new drapes, but she nodded. "Of course, Dad. I will get him." She left the room. I lay there in the silence and felt the anger burning in my gut. It was a clean, hot fire. It burned away the fear. It burned away the sadness. All that was left was the mission. I looked at the watch. Record everything I whispered to the gold medal. Do not miss a single word. 5 minutes later, they were both standing at the foot of my bed. Desmond looked like he was about to vomit. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at his shoes. Courtney stood close to him, her hand gripping his elbow, not for support, but to keep him from running away. "Come closer," I wheezed. They stepped forward. The smell of Desmond's fear was potent. It smelled like sweat and stale whiskey. I reached out my hand, my shaking hand, the hand with the watch. Courtney took it. She had to. To refuse a dying man would break the character she was playing. "I want to thank you," I said, squeezing her fingers with surprising strength. Courtney blinked. "Thank me." "Yes," I said. "You have taken such good care of me. You and Desmond. You made sure I wasn't alone. You made sure I didn't suffer for too long." I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Was I being sarcastic? No, I sounded sincere. I sounded like a confused old man who believed the lie. She relaxed. Her shoulders dropped. A small, smug smile touched the corners of her lips. "We did our best, Dad," she said, patting my hand. "We love you." "I know," I said. "That is why I want to ask you for one last favor." "Anything, Dad," Desmond choked out. "Anything." "I don't want a funeral," I said. "Funerals are for the dead. I am still here, just barely." I coughed, a wet, racking cough that shook the bed frame. "I want a party," I said. "A farewell party, here, in this house, this Saturday." "A party?" Courtney repeated. She looked skeptical. "Dad, you are in no condition for a party. I want to say goodbye to everyone." I interrupted her. "I want to see my friends. I want to see the family. And I want to make an announcement." Courtney's ears perked up. "An announcement?" "Yes," I said. "I want to give you the house, publicly, in front of everyone. I want to hand over the deed and the keys while I can still speak. I want everyone to know that this house belongs to you now." I watched the greed bloom on her face. It was ugly and fascinating. She wasn't thinking about my health anymore. She was thinking about the audience. She was thinking about the victory lap. She was thinking about how good she would look accepting the keys from a grateful, dying father-in-law. It would legitimize everything. No one could question the will if I gave it away while I was still breathing. "That is a beautiful idea, Dad," Courtney said. "A celebration of your life. We can do that." "Saturday," I said. "It has to be Saturday. I don't think I will last until Sunday." "Saturday it is," she said. "We will cater it. We will make it beautiful." She squeezed my hand back. It was the handshake of a deal struck with the devil. She thought she was the one holding the contract. She didn't know she was signing her own confession. "Now," I said, releasing her hand, "I need to rest. But bring me a pen and paper. I need to write down the guest list." Desmond rushed to the desk in the corner and brought me a notepad and a pen. He handed them to me with trembling fingers. "I am sorry, Dad," he whispered so low, Courtney couldn't hear. I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had taught to tie a tie. "Don't be sorry, son," I said softly. "Just be ready." He didn't understand what I meant. He nodded, wiping his eyes, and stepped back. I propped myself up on the pillows. I clicked the pen. It was a satisfying sound. Click, like the cocking of a gun. I began to write. Courtney hovered over my shoulder, trying to read the names. "Who is Marcus King?" she asked, reading the first name. "Just an old fishing buddy," I said. "We haven't spoken in years. I want to make peace." Courtney nodded. She didn't know who Marcus King was. She didn't know that Marcus King was the chief of police for the entire city of Chicago. She didn't know that Marcus and I had served in Vietnam together. She didn't know that Marcus was the one man in this city who hated criminals more than I did. To her, he was just another old black man, a nobody. I wrote down the next name, Sarah Jenkins. "Who is she?" Courtney asked. "My cousin from Atlanta," I lied. She was actually the senior investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune. She had been chasing a story about nursing home fraud for months. I knew she would be very interested in the conditions at Golden Oak Manor. I continued to write. I wrote down the names of the board members of the real estate firm where Courtney worked. "Why them?" Courtney asked, sounding nervous. "Because I want them to see how successful you are," I said. "I want them to see that you are inheriting a multi-million-dollar estate. It will be good for your career, won't it?" Courtney smiled. She couldn't help herself. The vanity was too strong. "Yes," she said. "Yes, it would be very good." I handed her the list. There were 20 names on it. Half of them were family. The other half were the execution squad. "Send the invitations today," I said, closing my eyes. "Tell them it is urgent. Tell them Jeremiah Brooks is saying his final goodbyes." "I will, Dad," Courtney said, taking the list. "I will handle everything." She turned to leave the room. Desmond followed her like a shadow. Courtney stopped at the door. "Rest well, Dad," she said. "Saturday will be a big day." She closed the door. I listened to their footsteps fading down the hall. I heard Courtney laughing. It was a light, tinkling sound. She was happy. She had won. The old man was dying. The house was hers, and she was going to have a party to prove it. I opened my eyes. I looked at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. I pulled the blanket up tighter. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain was returning. My bones ached. My skin burned. But for the first time in months, I felt peace. Saturday was 3 days away. I just had to stay alive for 3 more days. I looked at the watch on my wrist. It was ticking, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. "Tick-tock, Courtney," I whispered. "Tick-tock." I reached for the glass of water on the nightstand. My hand shook, but I managed to take a sip. I needed to be hydrated. I needed to be clear-headed. I had a speech to write. Most people write a will to leave their assets behind. I was writing a speech to take my life back. I lay back down and closed my eyes. I imagined the look on her face when the music stopped. I imagined the look on Desmond's face when the handcuffs clicked. It was going to be a hell of a party. My home had been transformed into a funeral parlor that served champagne. That was the only way to describe the scene unfolding in my living room on Saturday evening. Courtney had outdone herself. She had hired a catering company that usually serviced high-end art gallery openings. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets circulated through the crowd with silver trays of shrimp cocktail and truffle oil bruschetta. The lighting had been dimmed to a respectful amber glow, but the music was upbeat jazz. It was a farewell party, she said, a celebration of life. But to anyone paying attention, it looked exactly like what it was, a victory lap. I sat in my wheelchair in the corner of the room near the fireplace. I was wearing my best Sunday suit, which hung loosely on my frame now that I had lost 15 pounds from the radiation sickness. I had applied the makeup again, looking ghostly and frail. My head lolled to the side slightly, as if I could barely hold it up. But my eyes were sharp. My eyes missed nothing. I watched Courtney working the room. She was wearing a black dress, but it was cut low and tight-fitting. It was the kind of dress you wear to a cocktail party, not to a vigil for a dying man. She held a crystal flute of sparkling wine in one hand and touched people on the arm with the other. I could hear her voice drifting over the jazz music. "It is so tragic," she was saying to a group of her real estate colleagues. "The doctors say it is a matter of days, maybe hours. We just wanted him to be surrounded by love at the end." She dabbed at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. "But we have to be strong. Desmond and I are ready to take on the responsibility of the estate. It is what he wants. He wants to know the house is in good hands before he passes." Her colleagues nodded solemnly, sipping my expensive wine. They looked around the room, evaluating the crown molding and the hardwood floors. They weren't seeing a home. They were seeing a commission check. They were calculating the listing price in their heads. I saw one of them, a man with slicked back hair, pick up a porcelain vase from the mantelpiece and check the bottom for a maker's mark. He put it back with a nod of approval. They were already appraising my life piece by piece. Desmond stood by the bar. He wasn't working the room. He was working on a bottle of scotch. He looked terrible. His tie was crooked, and his eyes were red. Every time someone offered him condolences, he flinched. He knew the truth. He knew that every person in this room was unwittingly participating in a murder. He drank to drown the voice in his head, but I knew that voice. It knew how to swim. I sat there and let the anger warm me. It was better than the heating pad on my back. I watched my daughter-in-law smile and accept premature sympathy. She looked like a queen holding court. She had no idea that the throne she was sitting on was built on a trap door, and I was the one holding the lever. Then the front door opened, and the second wave of the invasion arrived. My family, or at least the people who shared my DNA. I hadn't seen most of them in years. They were distant cousins, nieces and nephews, who had been too busy to call when Sarah died. They were too busy to visit when I was lonely. But the moment Courtney sent out an invitation that hinted at a distribution of assets, they had miraculously cleared their schedules. Cousin Verna was the first to approach me. She was a large woman, wearing a hat with a feather in it. She smelled of mothballs and greed. "Jeremiah," she boomed, leaning down to hug me. "Oh Lord, look at you. You look like you have one foot in the glory land already." I didn't hug her back. I just wheezed. "It is good to see you, Verna," I whispered. She pulled back and patted my cheek a little too hard. "I was just telling your sweet daughter-in-law how much I always admired that grand piano of yours," she said, lowering her voice. "You know my little Marcus is starting lessons. It would be a shame for it to just sit here gathering dust when you are gone." I looked at the Steinway in the corner. "Sarah used to play it every Sunday." "I will keep that in mind, Verna," I said. She beamed. "That is good. Family should look out for family." She walked away toward the buffet table, already claiming the piano in her mind. Then there was my nephew Tyrell. He was wearing a tracksuit to a formal party. He walked over with a beer in his hand. "Hey, Uncle Jay," he said. "Heard you were cashing out. Tough break." I nodded slowly. "Hey, man," Tyrell said, leaning in close. "I saw the Mustang in the garage. The 67. That is a sweet ride. You know, I have always been a car guy. If you haven't promised it to Desmond, maybe you could write me down for it. Desmond doesn't drive stick anyway." I looked at him. Tyrell had never held a job for more than 6 months. He would wrap my Mustang around a telephone pole in a week, or sell it for parts. "We will see, Tyrell," I rasped. "Cool, man, cool," Tyrell said, tapping his beer bottle against my wheelchair. "Catch you on the other side." He wandered off to find the shrimp. They came at me in waves, asking about the silver, asking about the vintage tools, asking about the life insurance. Not one of them asked if I was in pain. Not one of them asked if I was scared. They were vultures circling a carcass that wasn't even dead yet. They were picking the meat off my bones while I was still using them. I cataloged every request. I memorized every greedy face. I looked at the watch on my wrist. The recording light wasn't on, but the tape was rolling. I hoped the microphone was picking up this feeding frenzy. I wanted the judge to hear exactly why I left them nothing. Courtney came over to check on me. She shooed Tyrell away. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked, checking her watch. "It is almost 8 o'clock. The notary is here. Stan is setting up the papers on the dining table. Are you ready to make the speech?" I looked up at her. Her eyes were bright with anticipation. She was vibrating with it. "I am ready," I said. She signaled to Desmond. He put down his glass and walked over. He looked steady, but his hands were shaking. "Time to go, Dad," he said, grabbing the handles of my wheelchair. He pushed me toward the center of the room. Courtney walked ahead of us, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. "Everyone, please," she called out, her voice ringing clear like a bell. "Can we have some quiet, please? Jeremiah has something he wants to say." The jazz music cut out. The chatter died down. The clinking of silverware stopped. A hush fell over the room. It was a heavy, expectant silence. All eyes turned to me. I looked around the room. I saw the real estate agents waiting for the listing. I saw the cousins waiting for the furniture. I saw Courtney waiting for the deed. I saw Desmond waiting for the end of his guilt. They were all looking at a sick old man in a wheelchair. They saw a victim. They saw a payday. I took a deep breath. It rattled in my chest, but it filled my lungs. Desmond locked the brakes on my wheelchair. He stepped back, standing next to his wife. They presented a united front, the grieving son and the supportive daughter-in-law. I looked at the gold watch on my wrist one last time. It was time. Courtney handed me a microphone. "Go ahead, Dad," she whispered. "Tell them." I gripped the microphone. My hand shook, but my voice when it came out was surprisingly strong. It was the voice of the engineer who used to shout over the roar of machinery. It was the voice of the man who built bridges. "Thank you all for coming," I said. The feedback from the speakers whined for a second, then settled. "You are all here because you think I am dying," I said. "You are all here because you think this is the end of the story of Jeremiah Brooks." I paused. I saw Courtney nod encouragingly. She thought this was the preamble to the handover. "But before I go," I continued, "I want to talk about time. I want to talk about this watch." I raised my left hand. The gold chronograph caught the light of the chandelier. A murmur went through the crowd. They knew it was expensive. "My son gave me this watch 3 months ago," I said. "He told me it was a symbol of his love. He told me he wanted me to have time for myself." I looked at Desmond. He was sweating now. Rivulets of perspiration were running down his face. But this watch is special, I said. It is very special. And tonight, I want to show you exactly what makes it tick. I reached for the clasp. Courtney's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't in the script. I was supposed to be talking about the deed, not the jewelry. I unbuckled the watch. I held it up. "Mr. Russo," I called out, "if you please." From the back of the room near the kitchen door, a figure stepped forward. It was Mr. Russo, wearing a suit that was 30 years out of style but pressed to perfection. He walked through the crowd carrying a small black box connected to the sound system. People stepped aside, confused. Courtney looked at Desmond. "Who is that?" she mouthed. Desmond shook his head, terrified. Mr. Russo walked up to me. He took the watch from my hand. He didn't smile. He looked like an executioner. He plugged a cable into the side of the watch case, a hidden port that no one knew existed. Courtney stepped forward. "Dad, what are you doing? We need to sign the papers." I ignored her. I looked at the crowd. "I told you all that I was sick," I said, my voice dropping to a growl. "I told you it was old age. I told you it was cancer." I gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. I lied. I stood up. I didn't struggle. I didn't wobble. I pushed myself up with the strength of a man who had been fueling himself on rage for 3 days. I stood to my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I stood straight. Gasps erupted from the room. A glass shattered somewhere in the back. Courtney stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. Desmond looked like he had seen a ghost. "I am not sick from old age," I roared, my voice filling the room without the microphone. "I am sick because for 3 months I have been wearing a nuclear reactor on my wrist." I pointed at the watch in Russo's hand. "Play it," I commanded. Russo hit the button, and the party ended. The trial began. The microphone felt cold and heavy in my hand, like a judge's gavel. I looked out at the sea of faces in my living room. They were all waiting for the final words of a dying man. They expected a tearful goodbye. They expected me to talk about the light at the end of the tunnel. They expected me to hand over the keys to the kingdom and then quietly fade into the background. I cleared my throat. The sound was wet and weak, just as I had practiced. "My son gave me a gift," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I paused and looked directly at Desmond. He was standing next to Courtney, wiping sweat from his forehead with a cocktail napkin. He looked like a man standing on a trap door, waiting for the lever to be pulled. "He gave me time," I continued. "That is what he said. He said this watch was a symbol of time." I lifted my left arm. The gold sleeve of the chronograph caught the light from the chandelier. It glittered. It looked expensive. It looked beautiful. But to me it looked like the barrel of a loaded gun. "Desmond," I said softly, "do you remember the day you put this on my wrist? Do you remember what you said to me? You said you wanted me to have something that would last forever." Desmond swallowed hard. I could see his Adam's apple bobbing. He tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. "Yes, Dad," he croaked. "I remember. But time is a funny thing," I said. My voice began to change. I dropped the rasp. I dropped the tremor. I stood up a little straighter in the wheelchair. I let the strength of my anger fill my lungs. "Time reveals all things," I said, my voice booming, now deep and resonant. The voice of the man who had raised a family and built a life in this city. "Time does not lie. People lie. Watches lie. But time itself is the brutal, honest truth." A ripple of confusion went through the room. People exchanged glances. Why was the dying man sounding so strong? Why was he looking at his son with eyes that burned like coals instead of swimming with tears? Courtney stepped forward, a frozen smile plastered on her face. "Dad," she said, her voice high and tight, "you are getting tired. Maybe we should skip to the signing. The notary is waiting." I ignored her. I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes locked on Desmond. "You wanted this watch to count down the minutes of my life," I said. "You wanted it to mark the end. But you forgot one thing, son. You forgot that your father is an engineer. You forgot that I don't just look at the surface of things. I look at what makes them work. I look at what is hidden inside." Desmond took a step back. He bumped into a waiter, causing a tray of champagne glasses to rattle. He knew. In that moment, he knew. I reached for the clasp of the watch. "For 3 months I have worn this weight," I said. "For 3 months I have felt it against my skin." I unbuckled it. The metal made a sharp click in the silent room. I pulled it off my wrist. I held it up high. "And now," I said, "I think it is time for everyone else to hear what I have been listening to." I turned my wrist outward. The skin underneath the watch was revealed. It wasn't just pale, it was raw, it was burnt. A perfect circle of red, irritated flesh, where the radiation had been cooking my flesh. A woman in the front row gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Courtney saw the mark. Her eyes widened. She knew exactly what that was. She knew the shielding on the original watch had been filed down. She knew I should be dead or in a coma by now. "Mr. Russo," I called out. The crowd parted as Mr. Russo stepped forward. He walked with a solemn dignity, carrying the small black box connected to the sound system. He looked like an undertaker, coming to collect a debt. "Who is that?" Courtney demanded, her voice rising in panic. "Dad, what is going on? This is not part of the plan." "The plan," I laughed, a dry, harsh sound. "Oh, Courtney, we are just getting to the best part of the plan." Mr. Russo took the watch from my hand. He treated it like the evidence it was. He plugged the cable into the side of the case. I looked at the crowd. My daughter-in-law and my son wanted to give me a farewell party, I announced. They wanted you all to witness the transfer of my legacy. Well, I agree. I want you to witness it too. But first, I want you to hear the negotiation. Courtney lunged forward. "Stop," she screamed. "Stop this right now. He is delirious. He is having an episode. Desmond, grab the watch." Desmond didn't move. He was paralyzed by terror. Russo hit the button. A burst of static erupted from the high-quality speakers Courtney had rented. Then the audio cleared. The voice that filled the room was unmistakable. It was Courtney. "He is taking too long." The voice was sharp, impatient, and cruel. It echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Then came Desmond's voice, weak and pathetic. "He is strong. He is a tough old man." Then Courtney again. "He is suffering. We should put him in a home. It would be faster." The room went deadly silent, the kind of silence that feels like the air has been sucked out of the space. The guests who had been drinking my wine and eating my food stood frozen glasses halfway to their mouths. Courtney's face went white. She looked around the room, seeing her colleagues, seeing her boss, seeing the neighbors. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. "It is a fake. It is AI. He made it up." But the recording continued. "If we don't get power of attorney soon, we lose the condo downtown. We lose the cars. We lose everything. You won't give us $200,000 to cover your gambling debts, Desmond." Desmond covered his face with his hands. A sob escaped his throat, loud and pathetic. Then came the part that made the blood run cold in everyone's veins. The doctor said consistent exposure is key. If the levels drop, his marrow might start to recover. We need him weak. We need him confused. We need him gone. Consistent exposure. The words hung in the air. I stood there watching them. I watched the realization dawn on the faces of the guests. They looked at the red burn on my wrist. They looked at the expensive watch. They put the pieces together. This wasn't a party. It was a crime scene. Courtney lost her mind. The mask of the sophisticated real estate agent crumbled completely. She became a cornered animal. She rushed toward Mr. Russo, her hand outstretched, trying to claw the device away. "Give me that," she screamed. "You senile old fool. You ruined everything." I stepped in her path. I didn't need the wheelchair anymore. I didn't need the act. I grabbed her wrist. My grip was iron. The adrenaline of justice was flowing through my veins, stronger than any poison. "Sit down, Courtney," I roared. The sound of my voice was terrifying. It was the voice of a father who had been pushed too far. It was the voice of a black man who had survived Jim Crow and Vietnam and the death of his wife, only to find the enemy sleeping in the next room. I shoved her back. She stumbled and fell onto the sofa, the same sofa she had planned to inherit. The recording played on relentlessly. "Who do you think the jury will believe? I am just the concerned wife. You are the desperate son." The tape ended with a click. For 3 seconds, no one breathed. Then I spoke into the silence. "You wanted the house, Courtney," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You wanted the money. You wanted the life I built with my bare hands." I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the deed," I said, holding it up. Courtney's eyes tracked the paper. Even now, even in her ruin, she wanted it. "And this," I said, pulling out another document, "is the new will I signed 3 days ago." I ripped the papers in half. The sound was loud and satisfying. I ripped them again and again until they were confetti. I threw the pieces into the air. They rained down on Courtney like snow. "You get nothing," I said. "Not a dime, not a brick, not a single memory." Courtney looked at the shredded paper on her lap. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "You can't do this," she stammered, tears of rage streaming down her face. "We have rights. We have the power of attorney. You signed it." I laughed. "I signed it Jeremiah Brooks," I said. "No middle initial. My lawyer tells me that makes it about as legally binding as a napkin in a bar." I pointed to the back of the room. "And speaking of the law, I think there is someone here who would like to have a word with you." The guests turned around. Standing by the door was Marcus King, my old fishing buddy. But tonight he wasn't wearing his fishing vest. He was wearing his full dress uniform. The gold badge of the chief of police shone under the lights. Behind him stood 4 uniformed officers. Chief King stepped forward. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. He walked up to the stage, his face grim. "Courtney Vance," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "Desmond Brooks, you are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and elder abuse." Desmond collapsed. He didn't just fall. He crumbled like a building with a rotten foundation. He curled into a ball on the floor, weeping loud, racking sobs that sounded like a child. Courtney didn't cry. She stood up. She smoothed her dress. She looked at me with eyes full of pure, unadulterated hate. "You are a devil," she spat at me. "A hateful, spiteful old devil. You should have just died." I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had welcomed into my home. The woman I had tried to love for my son's sake. "Maybe," I said, "but God isn't ready for me yet, Courtney. And the devil." I leaned in close so only she could hear me. "The devil is afraid I might take over his job if I go down there right now." The officers moved in. The handcuffs clicked. The sound was sweeter than any music I had ever heard. The party was over. The guests were silent. But as they dragged my son and his wife out of the house, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, hollow sadness. I looked at the watch still connected to the speakers. It kept time perfectly. It tick-tocked away the seconds of my son's freedom. "Take them away," I said, turning my back on them. "I have some cleaning to do." The audio recording had stunned them, but human beings are visual creatures. We believe what we see far more than what we hear. The silence in the room was heavy, but it was about to be shattered by the blue light of the 70-inch television screen mounted above the fireplace. I still held the remote control in my hand. My thumb hovered over the power button. I looked at Courtney. She was slumped on the sofa, panting like a trapped animal. I looked at Desmond. He was staring at the floor, praying for the earth to open up and swallow him whole. I did not give them that mercy. "You heard the negotiation," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room. "You heard the intent. But some of you might be thinking it was just talk. Some of you might be thinking that maybe they were just blowing off steam. Maybe they didn't really mean to hurt anyone." I pointed the remote at the screen. "Watch," I commanded. The screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy, black and white, but the resolution was high enough to count the wrinkles on a face. It was the kitchen camera feed from 2 days ago. The timestamp in the corner read 11:30 p.m. The room gasped as they saw Courtney enter the frame. She was wearing her silk robe. She looked around, checking the doors, checking the windows. She looked exactly like a thief in her own home. Then she walked to the pantry. On the screen, Courtney reached behind a box of cereal and pulled out a small glass vial. She uncorked it. She walked over to the stove, where a pot of mushroom soup was cooling. The same soup she had served me with a smile. The same soup she told me was full of vitamins. She poured the liquid into the pot. She stirred it. Then she washed the vial and put it back in her pocket. I paused the video on the frame where she was stirring the poison. Her face on the screen was illuminated by the stove light. She was smiling. It was a cold, satisfied smile. A woman in the back of the room let out a sob of horror. "That is soup," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "That is the soup she fed me on Thursday, but I didn't eat it." I hit play again. The footage switched to the garden camera. It was dawn. The light was gray and ghostly. The screen showed me walking out with a bowl. It showed me pouring the soup into a dish for Buster the stray cat. And then it showed the aftermath. I fast-forwarded 3 hours. The sun was up. The guests leaned forward, mesmerized by the horror. Buster walked into the frame. He stumbled. He fell. His legs kicked out in a violent spasm. Foam appeared around his mouth. It took him 4 minutes to die. 4 minutes of agony. 4 minutes of convulsing, while the neurotoxin shut down his nervous system. When the cat finally went still on the screen, the room erupted. This wasn't financial fraud. This wasn't just a bad family dynamic. This was violence. This was death. A man near the front turned away, covering his mouth. One of Courtney's real estate partners stood up so fast, his chair fell over backward. "You monster," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Courtney. "You sick, twisted monster." Courtney flinched, as if she had been slapped. She looked at the screen, then at the guests. The sophisticated facade she had spent years building was gone. In its place was the ugly reality of a killer. She tried to stand up. Her legs were shaky. She looked around for an ally, but she found only disgust. Her boss, a man who had praised her sales figures for years, looked at her with pure revulsion. "I didn't do it," she screamed, her voice cracking. "That is not real. He doctored the video. That is a deep fake. You know what technology can do these days. He is trying to frame me." She turned to her boss, grabbing his arm. "Brad, you know me. You know I wouldn't hurt a fly. This is a setup. He is crazy." Brad pulled his arm away violently. He wiped the sleeve of his jacket as if her touch had contaminated him. "Don't touch me, Courtney," he said, his voice icy. "Do not ever come near me or my firm again. You are fired, and I will personally make sure you never sell a doghouse in this city again." He turned to the other agents. "Let's go. I can't breathe the air in here." They started to file out. They left their champagne glasses on the tables. They left their plates of food. They walked out, leaving Courtney standing alone in the center of the room. She watched them go. Her career, her reputation, her social standing, it all walked out the door in expensive shoes. When the door closed behind the last of them, she turned back to us. The desperation in her eyes shifted. She realized she couldn't deny the video, so she did what all cowards do. She looked for a scapegoat. She turned to Desmond. "He made me do it," she shrieked, pointing at her husband who was still curled on the floor. Desmond looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "What?" he whispered. "He forced me," Courtney yelled, her face twisting into an ugly mask. "He is the one with the gambling debts. He owes the Sharks $200,000. They threatened to break his legs. He begged me to help him. He said we had to get the money from the old man. I was scared. I just did what he told me. I watched her with a cold fascination. It was incredible. She was willing to throw the man she claimed to love under the bus to save her own skin." Desmond stood up slowly. He looked at his wife. For the first time in 5 years, the fog of adoration seemed to lift from his eyes. He saw her clearly. He saw the woman who had spent his money, who had isolated him from his family, and who was now framing him for her plan. "You are lying," Desmond said, his voice shaking. "You bought the poison. You bought the watch. You told me it was the only way. I did it for us, you idiot," Courtney spat back. "I did it because you are a loser who can't provide for his wife. I did it because I was tired of living in a shadow while your father sat on a gold mine." She turned to the chief of police, who was standing by the door. "Officer, arrest him. He is the mastermind. I am just a victim of coercive control. I will testify against him. I will tell you everything." Chief King didn't move. He just crossed his arms and looked at her like she was something he had scraped off his shoe. "We have heard enough," Mrs. Vance King said. But I wasn't finished. I stepped down from the small platform where I had given my speech. I didn't need the wheelchair. I didn't need the cane. I walked across the Persian rug that Courtney had picked out. I walked past the weeping cousins, who were now realizing they would get nothing from the will. I walked straight to Desmond. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked at my shoes. "Look at me, son," I said. He didn't move. "Look at me," I roared, my voice shaking the crystal glasses on the sidebar. Desmond snapped his head up. His face was a ruin of tears and snot. He looked like a frightened boy, but he wasn't a boy. He was a 35-year-old man who had made a choice. "I don't care about her," I said, gesturing to Courtney, who was still arguing with the air. "She is a stranger. She is a parasite. I expected nothing from her, so her betrayal means nothing to me." I took a step closer to Desmond. I was close enough to smell the fear on him. "But you," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream, "you are my blood. You were the one I carried on my shoulders. You were the one I sat up with when you had a fever." Desmond sobbed. "Dad, please." "I didn't want to. That is the problem," I said, cutting him off. "You didn't want to, but you didn't stop it." I pointed a finger at his chest. I poked him hard, right over his heart. "You watched me get sick," I said. "You saw my hair fall out. You saw me vomiting blood. And what did you do? Did you call 911? Did you take the watch off my wrist? Did you fight for me?" Desmond shook his head. "No," I answered for him. "You checked the calendar. You counted the days. You worried about your inheritance." "I was scared, Dad," he whimpered. "She threatened to leave me." I laughed. A bitter, dry laugh. "She threatened to leave you," I repeated. "So to keep a woman who hates you, you decided to kill the father who loved you." I grabbed his collar. I pulled him close. "Let me tell you something about being a man, Desmond. A man protects his family. A man stands up when things are hard. You are not a man. You are a shadow. You are a hollow shell." I let him go. I pushed him away from me. "I am not angry because your wife is evil," I said, straightening my jacket. "There is evil in the world. We have to fight it. I am broken-hearted because my son saw the evil, and he pulled up a chair and watched." Desmond fell to his knees. "Dad, forgive me, please." I looked down at him. I looked at the top of his head. I remembered the day he was born. I remembered the promise I made to protect him. "I kept my promise," I said. "I protected you from everything. I protected you so much that you never learned how to protect anyone else." I turned to Chief King. "Get them out of my house, Marcus," I said. "The air in here is toxic." Desmond reached for my leg, but I stepped back. "Dad," he screamed. I turned my back on him. "I have no son," I said to the empty room. "My son died the day he put a radioactive watch on my wrist." I walked over to the fireplace. I looked at the picture of Sarah on the mantel. "I am sorry, Sarah," I whispered. "I tried." Behind me I heard the click of handcuffs. I heard Courtney screaming profanities. I heard Desmond weeping. But I didn't turn around. I stared at the fire, and I let the flames burn away the last of my fatherly love. The silence in the room was shattered not by a scream, but by a single nod. Marcus King, the chief of police, and the man I had fished with for 20 years, did not need to shout. He simply raised his hand and signaled to the uniformed officers standing by the front door. The lock clicked, and suddenly the room was filled with the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots hitting my hardwood floors. This was not a social call. This was a raid. Courtney stood frozen in the center of the room. Her face was a mask of disbelief as 4 officers in tactical gear moved past the terrified waiters. They were not looking at the guests. They were looking at the woman in the black dress, who had spent the last month planning my funeral. Chief King stepped forward, pulling a folded document from his breast pocket. He did not look at Courtney with anger. He looked at her with the professional detachment of a man who had spent his life taking out the trash. "Courtney Vance," he said, his voice booming off the vaulted ceiling. "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Jeremiah Brooks. You are also charged with the illegal possession and deployment of a Class II radioactive substance, specifically cesium-137, with the intent to cause biological harm." Courtney finally found her voice. It was a high-pitched screech that hurt the ears. "This is ridiculous," she yelled, backing away until she bumped into the piano. "It was a watch. It was just a watch. I didn't know what was inside it. I bought it at an antique store. I have the receipt." King didn't blink. He took another step closer. "We executed a search warrant on your vehicle while you were inside hosting this party, Mrs. Vance. In the glove compartment, wrapped in a lead-lined pouch, we found a receipt from an industrial salvage yard in Gary, Indiana. We also found a secondary vial of neurotoxin, matching the substance found in the stomach of the deceased feline in the garden." The color drained from Courtney's face so fast I thought she might faint. The guests gasped. The evidence was irrefutable. She hadn't just been sloppy, she had been arrogant. She thought no one would ever look. "Officer, secure her," King commanded. A female officer moved in. She didn't be gentle. She grabbed Courtney's wrists and pulled them behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and final. Click, click, click. "You can't do this," Courtney screamed, struggling against the metal cuffs. "I am a respectable member of this community. I am a partner at a real estate firm. My father-in-law is senile. He planted that evidence." She looked at me. Her eyes were wide and wild. Tell them, Jeremiah. Tell them you are crazy. Tell them you made it up. I stood there leaning on my cane, not because I needed it, but because it made me look like a judge. I looked at the woman who had poisoned my soup. I looked at the woman who had turned my son into a weapon. I am not crazy, Courtney, I said, my voice calm and cold. I am just disappointed. I expected you to be smarter. While Courtney was screaming, Desmond was silent. He stood by the fireplace, shaking like a leaf in a storm. 2 officers approached him. He didn't fight. He didn't run. He just held out his hands. He knew it was over. He looked at the handcuffs as they locked around his wrists, and he began to weep. It was a pathetic sound, the sound of a man who realized too late that the price of cowardice is freedom. But the night wasn't over. The handcuffs were just the first part of the punishment. The second part was going to hurt much more, because it attacked the only thing Courtney truly loved, her greed. I nodded to the back of the room. Althea Gibson stepped forward, my lawyer, my friend. She was wearing a sharp navy suit and holding a leather portfolio. She walked through the stunned crowd with the grace of a panther. She stopped in front of Courtney, who was now being held by the officer. Althea. Courtney gasped. Thank God. You were Jeremiah's lawyer. You have to stop this. You have to tell them about the power of attorney. You have to tell them I control this estate. Althea adjusted her glasses. She looked at Courtney with absolute disdain. I am Mr. Brooks's attorney, Mrs. Vance, she said, her voice crisp and clear. And I am here to execute his legal wishes. She opened the portfolio. She pulled out a document with a blue seal. As of 3 days ago, Mr. Brooks revoked all previous powers of attorney, Althea announced, addressing the room, but keeping her eyes on Courtney. He also executed a new last will and testament. Courtney stopped struggling. She went very still. What do you mean? She whispered. Althea held up the document. The house we are standing in valued at $2.5 million, along with Mr. Brooks's savings accounts, his investment portfolio and his life insurance policies, have been placed into an irrevocable trust. Courtney's eyes darted back and forth. A trust? A trust for who? For Desmond. Is it for Desmond? Althea smiled. It was a shark smile. No, Mrs. Vance. The sole beneficiary of the trust is the Southside STEM Scholarship Fund for Underprivileged Youth. The room went silent. Every dime, Althea continued. Every brick of this house, every car in the garage, it will all be liquidated and used to send young men and women to engineering school. Men and women who know the value of hard work. Courtney made a sound like a wounded animal. No, she wailed. No, that is my money. I earned it. I put up with him for 5 years. I deserve it. You earned nothing, Althea said, closing the portfolio with a snap. You bet on death, Mrs. Vance, and you lost. Courtney collapsed. Her legs gave out, and the officer had to hold her up. She wasn't crying because she was going to prison. She was crying because she was going to be poor. The realization hit her harder than any bullet. She had destroyed her life, committed felonies, and poisoned a man, all for absolutely nothing. Get her out of here, King barked. The officers began to drag Courtney toward the door. She kicked and screamed, cursing me, cursing Althea, cursing the world. But no one listened. She was just noise now, irrelevant noise. Then they moved toward Desmond, my son. The officers were gentler with him, but the handcuffs were just as tight. He walked slowly, his head hung low. As he passed me, he stopped. The officers paused, allowing us one final moment. Desmond looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. His face was wet with tears. He looked like the little boy who used to break a vase and wait for me to fix it. He wanted me to fix this. He wanted his daddy to make the bad men go away. Dad, he whispered, his voice breaking. I am sorry. I was scared. Please, don't let them take me. I looked at him. I searched my heart for a flicker of forgiveness. I searched for the love I had carried for him for 35 years. But all I found was ash. The radiation hadn't just killed my cells. It had killed the part of me that made excuses for him. I looked at his hands bound in steel. You were scared, I said, my voice flat. You were scared of your wife. You were scared of being poor, but you were never scared of losing me, were you? Desmond sobbed. I love you, Dad. I shook my head slowly. No, son. You don't know what love is. Love is protection. Love is sacrifice. Love is telling the truth even when it costs you everything. I leaned in close. I am not sending you to prison to punish you, Desmond. I am sending you there to educate you. I tried to teach you how to be a man with kindness and you didn't learn. So now you are going to learn with consequences. Desmond's knees buckled. Dad, please. Take him away, I said to the officers. They gripped his arms and marched him toward the door. He looked back at me over his shoulder one last time. It was the look of a man drowning who sees a lifeboat sail away. But I was not the lifeboat. I was the ocean. I watched them go. I watched the blue lights of the police cars flashing through the bay windows. I watched the neighbors gathering on the sidewalk, pointing and whispering. The house was finally quiet. The guests were gone. The lawyers were gone. The police were gone. I stood alone in the center of the room. My wrist throbbed where the watch had been. My heart throbbed where my son had been. I walked over to the table and picked up a glass of champagne that someone had abandoned. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The police cars drove away carrying the rot that had infected my life. I took a sip of the warm wine. It tasted bitter, but it was the taste of survival. I turned away from the window. I had a lot of work to do. I had a house to clean. I had a scholarship to set up, and I had a life to finish living. I was Jeremiah Brooks. I was 70 years old. I was radioactive, and I was finally free. The silence that followed the arrest was heavier than the noise of the party. For 3 days I had lived on adrenaline and rage, but now the tank was empty. I stood in the hallway of my brownstone and listened. The house used to settle with sounds I recognized. The creak of the floorboards in Desmond's room, the hum of the refrigerator. Now it just sounded vast and hollow. The police had taken the evidence, but they had left the ghosts. I walked into the living room. The catering staff had cleaned up the food and the broken glass, but the furniture was still arranged for the audience that had witnessed my family's destruction. I looked at the spot on the rug where Desmond had curled up and wept. I looked at the sofa where Courtney had sat like a queen before her fall. I needed to move. I needed to work. If I stopped moving, the grief would catch me, and I wasn't ready to be caught. I started with Desmond's room. I walked up the stairs, my legs aching not from radiation anymore, but from the weight of my years. I opened his door. It smelled like him, a mix of expensive cologne and the old baseball glove oil he used to use. I pulled a cardboard box from the closet and started packing. I picked up his trophies: Little League, high school debate team, participation awards. I held a plastic gold figure of a batter in my hand. I remembered the day he won it. I remembered buying him ice cream afterward. I remembered thinking he would grow up to be a giant among men. I placed the trophy in the box. It made a hollow thud. I moved to his closet. I saw the suits I had bought him for job interviews he never went to. I saw the shoes he wore to weddings where he pretended to be successful. I packed them all. Every item was a memory of a hope that had been twisted into a weapon against me. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I just felt a cold numbness. It was the feeling of amputation. I was cutting off a limb to save the body, but the phantom pain was already setting in. I taped the box shut. I took a marker and wrote Desmond on the side. I didn't write son, just Desmond. I carried the box to the garage. Then I went back for another, and another. By midnight, the room was empty. It was just 4 walls and a window. I stood in the center of the emptiness and said a silent prayer for the boy who used to sleep there. That boy was dead. The man sitting in a cell downtown was a stranger who wore his face. 2 days later, I drove to the Cook County Jail. The building was gray and lifeless, a concrete block designed to crush the spirit. I went through security. I surrendered my cane and my keys. I sat in a booth with a thick glass partition that smelled of bleach and misery. When they brought Desmond in, he was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was too big for him. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His shoulders were hunched, and his eyes were darting around the room like a frightened rabbit. He sat down and picked up the phone. I picked up mine. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking over the static of the line. "Dad, you have to get me out of here. It is terrible in here. The food is rot. The men are dangerous. I don't belong here." I looked at him through the scratched glass. "You are right," I said calmly. "You don't belong in here with criminals who rob liquor stores to feed their families. You belong in a different category, Desmond. You are here because you tried to kill your father for a condo." Desmond hit the glass with his fist. "I didn't try to kill you," he hissed. "It was Courtney. I just didn't stop her. There is a difference. Why are you doing this to me? You have money. You could hire a lawyer. You could bail me out. You are punishing me because you are angry." I leaned forward. "I am not angry, Desmond," I said. "I am parenting." "Parenting," he scoffed. "You are ruining my life." "No," I said, my voice hard as steel. "I am saving what is left of your soul. You have spent 35 years hiding behind me. You hid behind my money. You hid behind my reputation. You hid behind your wife. You have never stood on your own 2 feet and taken a hit." I looked at the guard standing by the door. "Responsibility is the first step to being a man, Desmond," I continued. "You broke it, you bought it. That is what I taught you in the shop. Well, you broke the law. You broke my heart, and now you are paying the bill." Desmond started to cry again. It was that same manipulative weeping he had used since he was a child. "I will die in here," he sobbed. "You won't die," I said, standing up. "You will read, you will think, and maybe for the first time in your life, you will understand that actions have weight." I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say I love you. I just turned and walked away. I heard him screaming my name, hitting the glass, but I didn't look back. Walking out of that prison was the hardest thing I have ever done, but I knew that if I turned around, I would be the one killing him. I would be killing his chance at redemption. The next morning, the cleaning crew arrived. I didn't hire a maid service. I hired an industrial hazard remediation team. They arrived in a white van, men wearing yellow Tyvek suits and respirators. It looked like a scene from a science fiction movie, but it was necessary logic. Radiation doesn't just disappear. The particles settle. They get into the fabric. They get into the wood. I watched them work. They stripped the varnish off the dining table where I had sat with the watch. They used special vacuums with HEPA filters to clean the carpets in my bedroom. They scrubbed the walls. It was loud, and it smelled of harsh chemicals, but I welcomed it. Every scrub of their brushes felt like they were removing the toxicity of the last 5 years. When they were finished with the invisible poison, I started on the visible one. Courtney's things. I didn't pack them in boxes. I dragged them out. I went into the master bedroom she had claimed for herself. I pulled her designer dresses off the hangers. I pulled her fur coats out of the closet. I grabbed her handbags, which cost more than my first car. I dragged them all out to the backyard. I had rented a large industrial dumpster. I didn't sell them. Selling them would mean taking money from her greed. I didn't donate them. I didn't want anyone else wearing the skin of a woman who could poison a soup. I threw them in the dumpster. I watched a $3,000 bag land on top of a pile of old drywall. I threw in her shoes. I threw in her jewelry box. Then I went to the living room. I looked at the painting she had hung over the fireplace. It was a modern piece, cold and sharp. I took it down. I marched it out to the back and shattered the frame against the side of the dumpster. I threw it in. I stood there breathing hard. The backyard was quiet. The dumpster was full of luxury trash. I went back inside. The house smelled of industrial cleaner and lemon. It was empty. The walls were bare. The closet was empty. I sat down in my old leather armchair, the one Courtney had tried to throw away. I looked around. It was just me and the silence. But for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. It felt safe. I had lost a son, but I had regained my dignity. I had lost a family, but I had saved my home. I closed my eyes and listened to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Tick, tock. It was the sound of my time, my own time, and I was going to spend every second of it living on my own terms. 1 year has passed since the police lights faded from my window and the silence took over my home. But if you walked past my brownstone today, you would not hear silence. You would hear the screech of power tools. You would hear the rhythm of hip-hop music. And most importantly, you would hear the sound of young men laughing. I did not sell the house. I did not move into a condo. Instead, I turned the entire ground floor garage into the Brooks Community Workshop. I wiped the grease from my hands with a rag and looked out over the shop floor. It was Saturday morning. 20 boys from the south side were huddled around the engine block of a 1998 Honda Civic. They were wearing blue coveralls that were a little too big for them, but they wore them with pride. These were boys that the world had written off. They were boys that the school system labeled as trouble. But when I looked at them, I didn't see trouble. I saw potential energy waiting for a spark. Malik, a lanky 15-year-old with braids, was holding a torque wrench like it was a foreign object. He was trying to force a bolt that didn't want to move. I walked over. My cane clicked on the concrete floor, but I moved faster now. The radiation was gone from my body thanks to the treatments, but the fire in my belly was burning hotter than ever. "Easy, son," I said, placing my hand on his shoulder. "You cannot force a machine. If you fight it, the machine will always win. You have to listen to it." Malik looked up at me. He had a bruise on his cheek from a fight at school earlier in the week. He was angry at the world, just like Desmond used to be. But unlike Desmond, Malik was standing here on a Saturday morning, trying to learn. "It is stuck, Mr. Brooks," he grunted. "It is rusted shut." "It is not stuck," I corrected him. "It is just stubborn, like you." I took the wrench. I didn't use strength. I used leverage. I applied a little heat with a torch, then tapped it gently. I turned the wrench. With a satisfying crack, the bolt gave way. "See," I said, handing the tool back to him. "Patience, physics, and a little bit of heat. That is how you fix things that are broken. That is how you fix engines, and that is how you fix your life." Malik smiled. It was a genuine smile. I looked around the room. These boys were not my blood. They didn't have my last name, but they were my legacy. I was teaching them how to repair cars, but really, I was teaching them how to repair themselves. I was teaching them that they had value. I was teaching them that they were builders, not destroyers. I thought about Desmond sitting in his cell. I had received a letter from him last week. He said he was working in the prison library. He said he was sorry. I didn't write back. Not yet. Forgiveness is a bridge that takes a long time to build, and he had burned the blueprints. But standing here surrounded by these kids, I felt the hole in my heart starting to fill up. I couldn't save my own son, but I could save these sons, and that had to be enough. "Lunchtime, Mr. Brooks," one of the boys yelled. "Pizza is here." I watched them scramble for the boxes. They ate like wolves. I stood back and watched. This was my house now. It wasn't a museum of betrayals. It was a factory of second chances, and business was booming. By the time the last boy left, it was late afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the garden. I was tired. My bones ached in that familiar way that comes from hard work, not from poison. I walked out to the back patio. The garden had been replanted. The spot where Buster the cat had died was now a bed of bright yellow marigolds. Life grows over death. That is the rule of nature. A figure was sitting at the stone chess table waiting for me. It was Mr. Russo. He was wearing a cardigan and a scowl. "You are late, Jeremiah," he grumbled without looking up from the board. "I have been sitting here for 20 minutes. My tea is cold." I sat down opposite him. "I was working, Russo," I said. "Some of us don't just sit around playing with watches all day." Russo snorted. He moved a pawn aggressively. "If it wasn't for me and my watches, you would be 6 feet under, my friend. You owe me your life." "I owe you a new chess set," I said, moving my knight. "You have been using this same strategy since 1975, and it never works." We played in silence for a while. The only sound was the clicking of the pieces on the stone. It was a comfortable silence, a silence that didn't need to be filled with fake pleasantries or hidden agendas. We were two old men who had seen the ugly side of the world and decided to stay beautiful. "Check," Russo said triumphantly. I looked at the board. He had me trapped. "You cheated," I said, narrowing my eyes. "I never cheat," Russo laughed. His laugh was a rusty sound, like an old gate opening. "I just pay attention. You were too busy looking at your marigolds." He leaned back in his chair and looked at me. His expression softened. "You look good, Jeremiah. You have color in your cheeks." "I feel good," I said. "I feel useful." Russo nodded. He tapped the side of his head. "The boys," he said. "They are good boys. Rough, but good. They remind me of us," I said. "Before the war, before the jobs, just hungry for a chance." Russo reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I found something," he said, sliding it across the table. "For the shop." I opened it. It was a set of vintage precision screwdrivers, the kind you can't buy anymore, the kind made of real steel. "Russo," I said, "these are yours, from your father." Russo shrugged. "My hands are getting shaky, Jeremiah. I can't do the fine work anymore. Give them to the kid with the braids. Malik. He has good hands." I looked at my friend. I saw the love behind the grumpy facade. He was doing exactly what I was doing, passing the torch. We weren't hoarding our treasures. We were giving them away to people who would respect them. "Thank you," I said. "Just beat me in this game, and we are even," Rousseau said. "But you won't, because you are terrible at defense." I laughed. It felt good to laugh. A year ago, I thought I would never laugh again. I thought my life was over. I thought I was just a walking bank account waiting to be drained. But here I was, drinking cold tea, losing at chess, and feeling more alive than I had in 20 years. The sun dipped below the horizon. The streetlights flickered on. I beat him in the end. It took an hour, but I trapped his king. Rousseau cursed in Italian and promised revenge next Saturday. I walked him to the gate and watched him shuffle down the street. He was my brother, not by blood, but by battle. And in the end, that is the only bond that holds. I walked back into the empty house, but it didn't feel empty tonight. It felt full of promise. I went to the sink and washed my face. I looked in the mirror. The gray pallor of radiation was gone. My skin was dark and rich again. My eyes were clear. I looked at my wrist. The gold chronograph was gone. It was sitting in an evidence locker at the police station. It would stay there until the trial was over. I never wanted to see it again. Instead, I was wearing a black plastic digital watch. It cost me $10 at the hardware store. It had a rubber strap and a light that turned green when you pressed a button. It was cheap. It was ugly. And it was perfect. I looked into the camera. I know you are watching. I know some of you are young and some of you are old. I have a message for you. They will tell you that you are past your prime. They will tell you that you should sit down and be quiet. They will tell you that your value is only in what you can give away. Do not believe them. I am Jeremiah Brooks. I am 71 years old. I have been poisoned. I have been betrayed. I have been left for dead by my own flesh and blood. But I am still standing. I tap the face of my cheap plastic watch. This watch tells the time just as well as a gold one. Better even. Because this watch belongs to me. I bought it with my own money. I wear it on my own arm. And every second it ticks is a second I earned. If you have people in your life who look at you like an ATM machine, cut them off. If you have children who wait for your death like it is a payday, rewrite the will. You do not owe anyone your dignity. You do not owe anyone your life. Love is not a transaction. Family is not a hostage situation. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked toward the stairs. I had a busy day tomorrow. The boys were coming back. We had an engine to rebuild. I am not done yet. My time is not up. In fact, I think I am just getting started. Thank you for listening to my story. If you ever feel alone, just remember the engineer in Chicago who turned a death sentence into a new life. Take care of yourselves, and watch your back. But more importantly, watch your heart. This is Jeremiah Brooks, signing off. The most painful radiation didn't come from the watch. It came from the betrayal of my own blood. I learned that we often ignore the red flags in those we love because we are terrified of the truth. But I discovered that age does not mean weakness. My years gave me the wisdom to see the trap and the strength to spring it. True family isn't defined by DNA, but by dignity, respect, and who stays when the music stops. I survived not because I was lucky, but because I finally realized that my life is worth fighting for, even against my own son. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, if you were in my shoes, would you have answered Desmond's letters from prison, or would you have walked away forever? I read every single comment. See you in the next story.